Hello, and welcome once again to the HORRORific podcast. Before we begin, could I just ask that you like and share these videos, try and help get the word around, and also please show support to horrors very kindly and lend their talents to make this show possible. If you're taking part in the live chat, welcome, and I hope you enjoy what we have ahead of us. In this episode, we're having the second part of the Amsterdam Occult series by Hobson. The story continues and things start ramping up as plans escalate. It's my pleasure to present to you A State of Sin. He drove the specially converted black delivery van slowly along Vondelstraat, the engine humming quietly and the headlights penetrating the swirling December fog. At just after 7 p.m. at this time of the year, this quiet and exclusive suburban street was all but deserted. The residents of the large gated townhouses safely inside their homes, perhaps sitting down to enjoy their evening meals or watching the TV news. Over to the left was a large park, empty now and filled with shadows. On the right, the ornate stone building housing of the Hollange Manege, the historic riding school and stables. Following the road around the large red brick church, the driver slowed down even further, his eyes roving left and right, looking for the correct building. And when he saw the huge gates, he turned the wheel and drew to a halt before the entranceway. Pulling down the peak of his baseball cap that he wore, hiding his face from prying eyes or cameras, he sat in his seat and studied the large house before him. Having thoroughly prepared and rehearsed for tonight, the building was already very familiar. Plans of the inside and outside were ingrained in his memory. The grey stone exterior, large windows on the lower floor and smaller square windows above, the flat roof with twin gables, the new carport on the left, the gravel drive, the gates with their intercom system, the layout of the rooms with the large and modern kitchen, the dining room and living room with their connecting arched doorway, the wood staircase twisting up to the bedrooms and bathrooms on the upper floor, the smaller dormer rooms right at the top, in one of which the daughter slept, the alarm and security cameras which hopefully he would not need to worry about, all very plush and modern, perfect for a young and beautiful family, a millionaire's home. Despite all the money spent in keeping the place secure from intruders, getting inside would be simple. Rich people tended by nature to be quite naive and not very streetwise. Therefore his plan was simple: drive up in his van, dressed in the smart uniform and hat of a well-known delivery company, here to deliver some packages to the homeowner. On the passenger seat beside him were several cardboard boxes, each one addressed to Dr. Christian Baker. He even had a barcode scanner, purchased off the internet several months ago. He had a fake ID badge clipped to his breast pocket. Attached to his waist belt was a small black object that looked like a mobile phone, but was in fact a fully charged taser. And on the inside of his jacket were 3 hypodermic syringes, each filled with a light yellow liquid. 2 milligrams of midazolam, a strong sedative that also had an amnesic effect and was very fast acting. 1 for the father, 1 for the mother, and 1 for the daughter. Using these would be easy. All he had to do was reach into his jacket, pull one out and jab it down hard into a large muscle mass, anywhere in the body. The back or upper arm, for instance. The drugs did sometimes have a few side effects and could cause violent reactions or even respiratory arrest if delivered in too high a dose. But he's willing to take the risks. He had practiced by injecting the sedative into random strangers on the metro late at night to watch the effect, to time the speed that people reacted and to test his technique. And that had been good fun. Watching these involuntary guinea pigs stagger and twitch, their legs buckling and collapsing, sending them crashing to the floor in a heap. But that was just for practice. A giggle, yes, but only for a dress rehearsal. Tonight was the real thing. Lowering his window, he reached out and pressed the intercom button on one of the gate posts. Seeing a small camera on the high wall, keeping his face tilted downwards, he waited for a reply, and when the female voice came through, he replied in a gruff tone, "Parcel delivery for Dr. Christian Baker, to be signed for." A slight pause and then, "Please come in." "Thank you." There was a loud click, and with a gentle buzz the large double gate swung inwards, and he drove carefully through. Turning about on the gravel driveway, he slowly backed up to the carport and switched off the engine. Before grabbing the cardboard boxes and jumping out, the driver twisted and glanced over his shoulder into the back of the van. He had mostly cleared everything out over the weekend, before converting it for tonight's purpose. On the bed of the van was an oblong-shaped metal storage box, about 5 or 6 feet long, welded to the floor. The lid was open, and inside the box was lined with blankets and a sleeping bag. Attached to the side was a small magnetic LED lamp, all switched on and ready. Next to it was a large plastic container. Satisfied that all was in order, he climbed out. Approaching the large side door underneath the carport, he rang the doorbell and waited, parcels clutched in his arms, a ready smile on his face. He heard the clip-clop of footsteps, high heels on the tiled floor, and then the door opened, and an elegant lady with brown hair was standing before him. He recognised her as the mother, Elise, 30-something. She didn't recognise him. Even without the baseball hat on, she wouldn't know him from any other delivery guy, because she'd never met him before. She was waiting with an irritated look on her face. "Hello," he said merrily. "It's a little late for deliveries, isn't it?" she inquired in her cultured voice. "We are just about to have dinner." "I'm sorry about that, ma'am." "Very well, what do I sign?" "I'm afraid Dr. Baker has to sign for them himself. They're medical files, so they require his ID number as well." Mrs. Baker sighed loudly, shook her head in exasperation. "Well, in that case you better bring them in. They look heavy." She moved to one side and he squeezed past, and then she turned and led him down the short hallway, indicating a small occasional table at the foot of the ornate staircase. She instructed him to place the parcels there. "I'll get my husband. Just one moment." She turned to go. "Actually, there's no need," he replied, as he popped them down, quickly reaching for his belt. The driver zapped her with the taser on the back of her neck, and her whole body stiffened before going straight over, like a felled tree, catching her temple on the balustrade. He watched her as she lay sprawled across the bottom step, completely still, and for a moment he thought she had knocked herself out cold, but then she stirred slightly, and a loud gurgling moan escaped her lips, followed by a peculiar wheezing. Christ, he thought in a sudden panic, the whole house will hear her. Quickly slipping his hand inside his jacket, he grabbed hold of one of the syringes and popped the cap off with his thumb. Leaning forward, he tugged at the neckline of her evening dress and yanked it down, and then jabbed the needle hard into the soft flesh at the back of her neck, pushing in the plunger to inject her with the full 2 milligrams of sedative. Breathing heavily, the driver stood back and watched as the drug immediately started to take effect, first causing an involuntary squirming, and then a brief and violent kicking of the legs as her body tried to fight the strong anesthetic coursing through her system, with one of her legs catching the table and sending a vase of flowers crashing to the floor. Then a slowing down of her movements and a quiet mumbling, before she was fully unconscious. The racket caused by the shattering vase could not have failed to alert everybody within earshot, and sure enough a male voice coming from the living room next door called out earnestly, "Honey, is everything all right?" The driver turned just as the sliding wooden door was pulled aside. The revealed short but squat man, with a grey beard, standing there and taking in the scene, no doubt wondering who the stranger in the baseball hat was. Then the gentleman glanced across to see his wife lying on the floor, before his eyes flicked back to the driver, mouth hanging open in alarm. "Who are you?" he managed to sputter ridiculously, before the driver flung himself forward with another syringe clasped in his hand. Swinging his arm down, he stabbed the needle straight through the man's white shirt and into his chest, bringing a cry of alarm. The driver watched as his victim stumbled backwards into the living room, with the syringe still sticking out of his chest. He crashed into a wooden cabinet, but remained upright, and then slithered along a wall, heading towards the arched entrance to the dining room. Yelling loudly in terror, he turned and stumbled away on his short legs, and the driver followed, expecting the sedative to start working. Yet to his alarm, nothing seemed to be happening. The man was not losing his strength, and a few seconds later he slipped through the far doorway. Snarling in anger, the driver chased after him, pulling out the third syringe. Rushing through the door, he found himself in the dining room. The other man was incredibly swift on his feet, and now moving quickly across the floor and making for the telephone on the wall, sending chairs crashing. There must have been something wrong with the second dose of midazolam. A faulty batch, perhaps. Either that or the doctor had an iron constitution. Whichever was the case, he had to stop him before he reached the telephone, and so once again he charged after the portly little man. He barely made it in time. Baker was just reaching for the cordless phone when the driver grabbed a hold of his shoulder and yanked him back, and the two of them fell to the floor with a thud. The full weight of Baker pressed down onto him, knocking the wind from his lungs. Yet somehow he was able to slip his own arm around the other man's body and stab down into his flat stomach, jabbing the needle into him over and over, squeezing every last drop of sedative out of the syringe. With a violent twitch and a spasm, the drug at last hit him. The driver could hear him gasping loudly, his body arching and turning this way and that, crushing down into him even further, before eventually he felt him sigh. All of the strength seemed to go out of the man, and finally all movement ceased. The driver pushed the body away and squirmed out from beneath it, and scrambled to his feet, struggling to get his breath back. Standing there, he looked down at the unconscious man. It had taken 4 milligrams to subdue him, way too high a dose, and which would more likely trigger a heart attack. Not that it mattered too much, not ultimately, but what it did mean was that he'd used up all 3 syringes, and there was still the daughter to deal with. Everything was still alright, he told himself. His carefully worked out plan had gone out the window, but he still had the taser. All he had to do was find the girl. She must still be in the house, he concluded, probably upstairs in her room, hiding, or hopefully blissfully unaware of the commotion downstairs. Well then, time to get down to business and finish this. Sure enough, he found her cowering in her bedroom, curled up into a fetal position and wedged in the far corner, with her eyes squeezed shut in terror. She had a tight hold onto an iPhone, and no doubt she had dialed 112 to plead for help. No matter, it was as inevitable that somebody would eventually call the emergency services. All this meant that he had to move a little bit faster. Quickly, he hit the girl with a short burst from the taser, worried that too big a jolt might seriously harm the 12-year-old. Then, while she was convulsing on the carpeted floor, he blindfolded her with the black scarf he pulled from his pocket, and then hurriedly tied her hands and feet with the cords from a pair of dressing gowns, before shoving one of her own socks into her mouth to gag her and stifle the screaming. Then, hefting her onto his shoulder in a fireman's lift, he carried her down the 2 flights of stairs, stepped over the unconscious body of the lady, and went straight out of the open front door. Unlocking the back of his van, the driver carefully laid the young girl into the metal storage box and banged the lid closed and snapped the padlock shut. He paused momentarily to slow his heart rate and steady his nerves, and then he grabbed the plastic container, which was heavy as it was filled with petrol, and after locking up the van doors, he returned to the entrance hall of the big house. Working quickly, the driver splashed the liquid all around the floor and over the walls and curtains, doing the same inside the living room, dumping the container. He remembered to scoop up the cardboard boxes and barcode scanner, and then backed outside. Taking out a cigarette lighter, he flicked it with his thumb, watched the small flame for a couple of seconds, and then tossed it inside. With a blast of hot air and orange flame, the flammable liquid caught light. The driver turned away, climbed back into the driver's side of the van, and dumped the boxes back onto the passenger seat. Backing out through the gates onto Bundlestrap, he smiled over his shoulder. "Let's go home," he told the girl. Putting the baseball hat even further down over his face, he slowly drove away into the foggy night. Well, we hope that you enjoyed our latest horrific tale. If you want to keep up to date with future episodes, then subscribe to our YouTube channel and like or follow our social media pages. You can also give the channel support by visiting our merchandise store and picking up some of our items. Please also take a moment to support our contributing artists who very kindly lend their talents to the show. Check out the links in the description on how you can do this. Well, that just leaves me to say, until next time my friends, keep it creepy, keep it horrific.